I'm Claudine Wong, joining you from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm joined by Matt Zimboli, Fishbowl CEO, coming to us from New York. And thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Claudine.
So let's talk about Fishbowl. It's a digital water cooler of sorts, a place where people from industries, various ones, can all come together, kind of talk about what they're going through, issues they're dealing with, emotions, logistics, to work it all out, right?
That's right. It's a network for verified professionals to come together, connect, and have anonymous conversations about workplace topics. The key point being, when users register, we make sure that they actually work where they say they work. In cases of healthcare, doctors and physicians and healthcare workers document their national provider identification number, NPI number. In case of professionals in other sectors, it's their work email. But then they were given the privilege of speaking anonymously, which gives you insight into topics that otherwise they might not discuss on networks like LinkedIn or other apps.
Right. Well, that LinkedIn, if you're going to say something, where you work, and I suppose it could come back and get you in a way that maybe prevents the way you talk. The verification is a big deal too, because you don't want people coming into these forums who don't really shouldn't be a part of that platform. I mean, you want it to be the employee lounge, but anonymous.
It's foundational. Yeah. I mean, it's a basic principle of the platform. Absolutely.
And so you have how many different industries, having these digital discussions?
Yeah, so we've launched into over 8 industries. Our roots are in the professional services industry. So, familiar industries like advertising and finance and consulting and accounting. We also launched the K through 12 teachers, so the education sector, around 6 months ago, thriving communities there. But more recently, and partially for personal reasons, we launched into the healthcare space to support some initiatives we have going on there.
That's an interesting space. I'm going to get to the actual Fishbowl part of that, but
sure.
You know very personally, firsthand, about COVID-19. Tell me about that. You guys tested positive in your house.
Yeah, so my wife is a emergency room physician in a Bronx hospital, and she actually tested positive fairly early on during this pandemic. And for unfortunately, it was preventable. Something that's a recurring news story. I know that your audience may have read about or heard about. But there early on, particularly, there was a real lack of protocol and PPE that was going on. And I still recall my wife coming back from her shift that day and telling me that she was afraid she had gone and contracted it. And then 2 days later, she tested positive when the symptoms started coming through. I tested positive despite our best efforts to quarantine, and we had a 2-year-old. So, for me, a lot of emotions and feelings personal about it, but personally, a lot of frustration and anger, frankly, a bit.
Yeah.
Probably more so than my wife. My wife was more understanding. She's the hero between us two. She's out there every day. I'm in the home working, but just a lot of anger and frustration at the system and the lack of accountability a bit, that I felt the institutions didn't have in place, and yes, I think it was exacerbated too later on.
Yeah. First of all, how are you guys all doing?
So we've recovered for the most part. It took a while. Amongst my, my employees know me to be a bit of a bull. So I know, if I get a flu or whatnot, I recover fairly quickly. This took me a full 14, 15 days with a lot of frightening moments in between. But for the most part, cleared out. My wife as well, a lot of frightening moments. And, we have a 2-year-old where I would say it was tough to those moments where, our symptoms were most severe. Not unsure whether we can, take care of her properly. So that was probably the most frightening moment for me personally, and I know my wife too. Thankfully, we were able to come out on the other side. My wife still has some issues around sense of smell and taste, but hopefully those symptoms,
But overall, pretty well. I mean, you guys are among the recovered category, which is
very fortunate.
Important. And a 2-year-old when you're healthy is difficult. A 2-year-old when you're sick, it's a whole nother ball game. For sure.
Right, it is, and the one silver lining here is undoubtedly our 2-year-old was exposed to this virus, but she no symptoms at all, and maybe that's one of the miracles of this thing. But if it wasn't for that, I honestly don't know how we would have coped dealing, catering to her illness and ours at the same time.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot to even kind of wrap your head around. So then that brings us back to this, getting the healthcare discussion within Fishbowl. And what's interesting is, I did a recent interview with a medical ethics professor who was talking about how healthcare workers, they're called heroes because they are doing so many things, but that narrative sometimes makes it hard for them to complain or point out problems in the system. And you referenced that earlier, where people are frustrated. I mean, they signed up because they want to help and they want to save lives, and that is what they are trying to do. But when you go to work every day, can you turn around and say, I don't want to come to work today because what happened to you is what could happen to them, and your outcome, while it was a long 14, 15 days, not everyone has that outcome. Do you think there was enough space for people to be able to just say this is not fair, especially in the healthcare industry? Because that narrative per se of when you're in front of the camera and wanting to, or you're online with your name and your identity, that narrative is a little more tricky.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so we've learned a lot with Fishbowl, and when it comes to institutions really controlling the narrative, or being very, let's put it more simply, their PR comms teams being very careful in the way images are portrayed and news is portrayed. I think what I found personally when it comes to the healthcare space and the medical institutions, I don't think it's apples to apples. I think in the same way we treat healthcare, and in a way that people get sick and people die, and if there's any sector where truth and like, you don't need to frame or overframe and over communicate the image, it would be in healthcare. And so I do think particularly there, stories of healthcare workers being terminated for speaking about these issues, just really shook a lot of healthcare workers, and this made them mum. And that's about the worst thing you can do, in a scenario where you're going through this anxiety, putting your physical health, exposing your physical health and putting at risk. Your emotional health is so important at the very least. And if you don't have the ability to just honestly address your feelings in some forum, it's really bad news. And so for me, that was a sensitive point, honestly, that not only were these physicians putting their lives on the line, but they were being told to be mum on stuff that they were noticing, and that was clear incorrect protocol, but they just couldn't voice themselves.
And to be mum puts them at risk as well. I mean, and that goes back to this whole, this graph that we're looking at. When you tell them, okay, you can say something, you can try to protect yourself, but you could at least not feel alone if you're feeling frustrated and angry as well. I mean, the anonymous part of it becomes even more important, I think, in that space.
Oh, absolutely. And the emotional support piece is here too. So I don't think it's just a matter of accountability and making sure, what should be said is said. But when it comes to the emotional support side, the healthcare space, physicians, RNs, PAs, this space is more buttoned up than others, where it's very hard, due to HIPAA and other stuff, just to speak off the cuff and candidly and loosely. And that's why you don't have many forums for these type of healthcare work professionals. So what we are finding is on Fishbowl, you have a little more honesty and ability to just emotionally resonate with one another, because the filter isn't there, and you can kind of just say what's on your mind. And I think that's really important now.
I think in this one, no, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but in this one too, you see that you say, the hospital's asking us to work unpaid shifts, no more N95 masks, colleague is already hospitalized. The comment doesn't even have to go on past that, except you're just trying to tell people, because you need people to know that this is what's going on. And
they want to rap with someone who's also going through the same thing. And so it could be a comment that comes through right after that like, yeah, look, I'm dealing with this as well. And just that, that sense of recognition goes a long way in helping to cope. During the worst of this, exactly. We're seeing a lot of discussions around different topics. Sometimes it's about coping with the reality, talking about frightening images of freezer trucks and dead bodies. There's a lot of almost raw honesty that's being portrayed. In some cases, it's pay, right? We're seeing a lot of conversations, really unfortunate conversations right now, where the healthcare workers aren't necessarily being compensated for for what they should be through hazard pay. And and there's some complaints, and I think rightful complaints being voiced on networks like Fishbowl, but other places too, about this. And I know Congress is discussing this now, but these are important
the
topics.
more conversations that people have and they realize they're not alone, then the more discussion could be happening, as a full industry, and this comment I thought was interesting too, because you feel like every hospital is overrun, and certainly, I mean, obviously in New York, they are full and busy, but the non-COVID related staff, as this person is coming through saying, you know, we're furloughed. Is that happening? You know, and then
Right.
as you were saying too, the coping of some of these other folks who are just, you know, this person saying a beer a day and 2 Benadryl at bedtime is just, you know, I mean, there is I think there's some humor and then some really sadness, and you know, when you're talking about wills and
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
the
exactly.
things that they have to discuss. I mean, those are things that no one wants to talk about, but if you're talking about it with someone else who has to talk about it, I mean, really, I think all of us are talking about wills more than because of the speed at which Corona takes over and separates families and loved ones. You know, these are discussions, but those who show up every day, and your wife who has to show up every day and put themselves at more increased risk.
Yeah,
Those
these
are
are
tough.
these are honest conversations we're being, forced to speak out about. Given the fact my wife is a physician, a physician assistant as well. These topics actually resonate with me personally. Some of which I've discussed with my wife, and some of the anxiety she's dealing with. Where although was infected, there's also a discussion of the possibility of being reinfected. Like, what's the recourse? What happens
Mm-hmm.
if? And so tough conversations, but they need to be had. And it's refreshing to see that at least there's an opportunity for these workers who are putting so much on the line to come to a place and at least not necessarily vent, but resonate a bit emotionally with others that can help pick them up a bit. I think that's what it comes down to.
Are you seeing a surge in the healthcare signups of people who are coming on too, where they're like, where did you hear that? Because I imagine it would be the digital water cooler then goes into the emergency room or the hospital where someone's like, yeah, I heard someone in Massachusetts had to deal with this, or someone in California was doing this. And where'd you hear that? Oh, I was on Fishbowl, you know,
Right.
and then that word of mouth that you're talking about, I would imagine that you're seeing the impact there.
Right. There's some there as well. It's a newer industry. We launched it a week and a half ago, so it's really really new. Majority of the healthcare workers that have been signing up are East Coast based, and now we're making our way towards, as word of mouth gets shared, out to the West Coast. What has been interesting to see is that we measure some of this stuff, but a lot of the sharing that's happening is actually not by physicians, but by potentially who would be patients. So people outside the space saying, hey,
Oh,
doctor,
interesting.
or like this could be interesting, maybe you want to check it out. We've noticed that in some of our patterns we're seeing right now, and I think it speaks to a lot of people are concerned about our healthcare workers, and trying to give them an outlet that could help them deal on a day-to-day basis, because this thing's not easy to handle.
You're talking about the verification process, and you talked about you starting in industries of marketing first and some of those other ones, and then going to education and verification of the educators. Was the healthcare professional forum on the docket of, this was our next one, or how much has COVID-19 kind of changed which way you go and where you feel like these forums are critical to helping out an industry or helping people feel like they have a place to go?
So it was not on the docket, I can say that, and it's fundamentally changed our even strategy. Partially, I mean, it was personal. I kind of shared the
Mm-hmm.
personal story and my
Yep.
own anger and frustration a bit. A lot of our employees too rallied around it. They felt that there's not much you can do or be in a position to do that can benefit, society, or an outcome that's good for the population. And we said, hey, maybe this could benefit. And so we wasn't part of the strategy at all, and we launched it. And so far so good. It's been really promising to see some of the conversations there as well. For us, I think what success honestly looks like is the same type of community dynamic we've seen take hold in our more white collar professional industries. If that same type of crowdsourcing, emotional support kind of circle type behavior we're seeing can come to the healthcare industry as well, I think that's success. I think we'd all be happy as a team.
Yeah, and for people who know, I mean, what information do you have from them? Because I think that no matter how anonymous that you say it
Right.
is, there is a fear, for healthcare
Right.
workers specifically, because there have been impacts to their jobs and people have lost jobs. But in every industry, I think there is a fear.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so, Fishbowl's system works because on the one hand, there's this accountability where you do verify who you are. And when others read your comments or posts, they know that you're actually ex-professional or you're a physician. And
Mm-hmm.
on the other side, there's comfort because the anonymity comes to place. And it won't work one way or the other. Too much anonymity without any accountability, there's
Yeah.
just a lot of toxicity and the types of conversations that nobody at our company is really interested in breeding. On the other side, if there's not enough anonymity, they're not going to talk. So there is a bit of a straddling the line, but that's very much kind of product design, the way we built the product. And so far, it's built on trust. Yeah, I mean, users do trust Fishbowl, but we're also looking to, I think, support the type of conversations again that are constructive, right? And so I do feel that there's a discourse that you might see on other purely anonymous networks, maybe like Reddits or whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
that you just don't see on Fishbowl, because that's not the type of conversation we're really looking to support, particularly with the professional lens that we're coming at it.
Yeah, I mean, is that where you thought the hole in the market was, in terms of, because there certainly are forums where people can go to, but depending on when you pop into them in terms of the types of conversations and the validity of the conversations, I think can be at issue.
Yeah, the biggest hole very simply was, we saw all these social media apps where people were sharing comfortably and in an authentic way, but when it came to your professional space, they didn't exist. LinkedIn is a resume, like you're pretty much speaking with, you have, most people have pictures of them in dress attire or work attire, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're not really comfortable. And so we wanted to create a professional experience that was more, uh, relaxed and more casual. And that required redesigning the product a bit to support this kind of anonymous, semi-anonymous mode. And so far, it's worked really well. Where again, we've kind of balanced the accountability piece with the anonymity piece to give just the right experience for users.
And how much monitoring do you guys do? Is it until someone flags you and says, "Hey, this poster is not adding to this conversation, or this comment was inappropriate, or I'm concerned about this one"? That's when you look, or do you guys kind of just watch it as it rolls?
So it's like three levels. So a lot of checks and balances. One level is we have a very big supportive power user base who kind of like a Wikipedia may act, where they actually actively like look for conversations that go against our community guidelines. We also have a pretty sophisticated system where if a comment or a post index is very high on sentiment, negative sentiment, that can get flagged for review. And then finally, we do try to incentivize positive behavior. So if a user acts in bad faith, more than 3 times, there are suspensions. We're not shy about that.
Mm-hmm.
They can be reversed. The point is that we're not about the power of the platform. We're about the power of the community. And so Fishbowl's thousands of communities, and what's good for the community should win at the end. That's our point of view. And so if one user abuses that or takes advantage of that, it's our belief that the community should win. And that's why a lot of these policies are in place.
Yeah, I think it's always a learning process. I don't want to pick on Nextdoor, but certainly that's one that people have pointed to, that
Right.
that it was designed for a very, I think, a productive reason. You have to verify people live in your neighborhood and they are from your neighborhood, but it does, and it can, some of those conversations descend into a place that I think people might deem as not as productive.
Right. Yeah. You need respect. You need responsible actors at this place. I think there's no appetite in the current social media environment we have to have another network launch that just adds more fire to the flame right now. And when it comes to trolling and all the other stuff. And so we've been very, very conscious about that in the way we designed it, and try to support the moderation.
Okay. Well, Matt Sunbully from Fishbowl, the CEO, thank you. I'm so glad that you are feeling better and you are on the mend, and I'm interested to see where the app and the conversations go as we continue to need spaces. You can socially distance on Fishbowl, so
That's right.
That is an important element. So, Matt, I appreciate the conversation.
Thanks for having me, and stay safe.
You too.